Egypt prepares for a presidential election with few surprise outcomes. Students, families, and supporters descend on Washington and other cities to demand lawmakers take action against gun violence. And Marvel's blockbuster film Black Panther breaks another record. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. Egypt voters began going to the polls on Monday in an election widely expected to give President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi another four-year term in office. El-Sisi has a single challenger, Mustafa Musa, who had backed Sisi before joining the race. A number of other candidates were either arrested or pressured to withdraw, and opposition parties have called for a boycott of the vote. El-Sisi cast his ballot Monday at girls' school in the Cairo suburb of Heliopolis as soon as the polls opened. The election lasts 3 days, with official results expected on April the 2nd. With El-Sisi expected to win, attention is focused on the number of people who will cast ballots in the election. El-Sisi came to power in 2013 by ousting President Mohamed Morsi and then winning a 2014 election with 97% of the vote. Now, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is seeking a new mandate in a contest with little suspense to political observers. It appears clear that el-Sisi will win. The big question is, by how much? Edward Iranian has more from Cairo.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi seeks re-election after a four-year term that has seen some successes, including a Suez Canal expansion and the discovery of major offshore natural gas reserves. But he has also been buffeted by terror attacks against churches and mosques and a protracted war against insurgents in the Sinai and along the border with Libya. Sisi, who ousted his Islamist predecessor Mohamed Morsi after widespread turmoil, is admired by some who have rallied to support him and disliked by others who want Egyptians to boycott the election.
Our group of opposition parties, tied to the civil democratic movement, chooses not to take part in the upcoming elections.
In 2014, 25 million people voted, and President Sisi won 23.6 million of those votes. This year, some are disenchanted.
People who stood there and said, we want to be involved in a process. They're not political, they're not Muslim Brotherhood, but they're regular citizens who want this country to be a democracy. 4 years later, this is what we get.
The president has called for a large turnout and urges Egyptians to be patriotic. Many of Egypt's African neighbors prefer Sisi to the Muslim Brotherhood, which they think has ties to terrorism.
The African situation, especially in North Africa and the Middle East, is very, very precarious, whereby people like al-Sisi are now being favored because of their military stance against jihadist organizations.
While the weak Egyptian economy is a drag for the president, some businessmen and public figures support him because of his pro-business stance. Supporters of Sisi's only opponent, Mustafa Musa, rally in downtown Cairo to enliven the contest after several weightier opponents dropped out.
It doesn't matter who wins. What matters is that Egypt wins.
It was not until 2005 that Egypt had its first contested presidential election.
Prior to that, it used to be referendums where we ended up with 99 point something for the president. It was a long struggle to take things where we finally had a proper election. It took a revolution to get there.
Sisi is Egypt's fifth president since the monarchy was toppled in 1952. 4 were military men. Edward Iranian for VOA News, Cairo.
A Sierra Leone court on Saturday upheld a request by a member of the ruling party for an injunction to delay a presidential election runoff that is scheduled for Tuesday. Ibrahim Sori Koroma filed for the injunction last Thursday, saying there was evidence of electoral fraud that needed to be investigated before the poll could go ahead. The supporters of opposition leader Julius Maada Bio, winner of the first presidential election earlier this month, took to the streets chanting, "We want vote." On Sunday, Bio criticized the delay and called it shameful. The former military junta leader will be standing against former Foreign Minister Samura Kamara of the ruling All People's Congress after neither of the two frontrunners secured a 55% majority in the first round. Now, the population of African immigrants has grown over the years in many U.S. states and cities in recent years. An increasing number of immigrants of African descent are seeing the need to also play a role in policymaking through elective offices. Lydia Daniel is one of them. The native of Nigeria is running for the Prince George's County Democratic Central Committee in the eastern state of Maryland. Ms. Daniel, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome. Now, first thing, what motivated you to want to run?
Well, I'm not a politician, but I've always been involved in civic action. I believe that unless we get our voices and ourselves into the room, we can't really affect the policies that adversely affect our communities at a higher level than other aspects of American culture. My particular district, there's about 7% sub-Saharan Africans, and I believe that we're not being represented at the level that we should be. I think perhaps that's because we're not engaging at the level that we should be engaging. And so I feel I am in a specific place where I can not only understand the struggles of the African immigrant, but I can also project their voices and make that voice louder.
Could it also be that the African immigrant community seems to be kind of cut off from the rest of the society around them, in that they kind of organize around community things, around immigrant issues, and not engaging more with the rest of their neighbors?
Yes. We have a lot of community organizations, like you said, that center around where you're from in a particular country in Africa. But I've seen a kind of movement now where we're getting together. Recently, UPAC had an event that invited people who were running for office from all over Maryland, and it involved many, many African groups. So it wasn't just Hausa or Igbo, or if you're from Senegal, it involved a lot of us. And I think that there's a movement now that is really changing the way that we're thinking about things. It's a time now where we can't just sit back and hope things will change for us. We have to be much more proactive in how we engage in the legislative process. And I think that we're starting to do that now. And I'm also seeing there are more African immigrants that are actually running for office, which is...
Break it down a little bit. What are some of the issues that are important to you that you think a person like you being at the table will make a difference in?
Well, for example, in Maryland, the top two issues are education. Maryland used to be the #1 state, and now it's at number 8. Healthcare, and I would add immigration to that. As I said, I'm not a politician, but
You're
I'm
now
a mom.
politician.
I'm not a politician. I'm a mother. I'm an entrepreneur. I have a small business. I graduated from law school. I'm a naturalized immigrant. So all of these things kind of give me that edge. I know what our community is like. We're hardworking people, we're educated people. We tend to be insular sometimes because we are weary of engaging in the political system, especially now with the rhetoric that's going on. But I think that the greatest thing about us is that we're very tenacious, we're very hardworking, we don't give up very easily. And whenever I talk to people from Africa, they come here because they want a better life for themselves and for their children. And they come here educated, and they work 2 to 3 jobs. And that kind of tenacity, that character, that spirit, that grit, I think has been instilled in me by my parents. And I think that that is what I can bring to my constituents if I'm elected.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. I mean, that will be something that also benefit to the community. But very quickly, you keep kind of distancing yourself from the level of politicians. You know, when someone is running and there's office, it's a politician.
Right.
Why do you have a little bit discomfort with that word?
I think politics or I guess the concept of politician now has become kind of, in this current atmosphere, people kind of shy away from it.
Yeah.
And I guess my point is, I'm just an ordinary woman. I'm just an ordinary person
running for political office.
Worrying about my daughter's school and how I'm going to pay for it, and about her health care. And I want her to grow up in a world where it's not an anomaly that a northern Nigerian woman would be running for office. I want it to be the norm.
Actually, we'd like to talk about that next time. Northern Nigeria, that's critical, but you know what? I want to thank you very much for coming on today and talking to us.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you so very much.
All right. So that is Lydia Daniel. She's running for the Prince George's County Democratic Central Committee in the state of Maryland here in the United States. Now, the United States is strongly condemning Houthi missile attacks Sunday aimed at cities in Saudi Arabia. The State Department says the United States supports the rights of our Saudi partners to defend their borders against this threat. A fragment from the barrage of ballistic missiles was fired into Saudi Arabia, allegedly by Iran-backed Yemeni rebels, killed one person and wounded two in Riyadh. Now, the victims are Egyptian nationals who are in a residential neighborhood of the Saudi capital. The Saudi Air Force says it intercepted and destroyed 7 missiles shot over Riyadh and 3 other cities. Hundreds of thousands of people marched in cities across the United States on Saturday to demand changes to gun policy, with many of them coming to Washington, D.C. A March for Our Lives is one of the several activist events organized by young people in the wake of February's high school shooting in southern Florida. Viewers, Jill Craig has more.
It's a movement for kids and by kids. Started after a gunman shot 17 people to death at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida on Valentine's Day. Across the U.S., students, parents, teachers, and other activists took to the streets to demand policymakers implement stricter gun control measures.
The school in Florida where this happened is very similar in demographic and in financial income as the town that I live in. And to see that something like that could happen in a town that's just like mine is really scary for me as a student.
Some in the crowd urged protesters to think about gun violence from different viewpoints.
We're just saying that black children, Black Lives Matter, and when we're being killed in schools, the country should be just as upset as they are now.
Meanwhile, on the West Coast, in Oakland, California, young protesters joined older ones. Some had personal experiences with gun violence.
At the very beginning of my women's health career, the clinic where I worked, which was a Planned Parenthood in Brookline, Massachusetts, had a shooting. 4 people were killed and more were injured. My colleague Shannon Lowney died. And that was now 23 years ago and counting. And there's been 0 progress, and in fact, possibly regression on this issue.
Not everyone agrees, however, with the aim of the march.
You know, the right to own firearms is a right enshrined in our Constitution, and I feel like this march is not going to solve anything. That by banning the semi-automatic weapons that they are trying to call for being banned isn't going to reduce gun violence. It's just going to take away the rights of law-abiding citizens.
But for those participating in the event, they hope the momentum continues.
A lot of the kids that are planning this event and events all around the country are high school students and young people like me, and you know, people this age are going to start voting in the next few years, and they'll be voting in the next presidential election and every election after that, and then they'll start running for Congress, and you know, that's when this movement is really going to start to take shape, I think.
Celebrities performed at and attended the rally, and Marjory Stoneman Douglas students spoke, including a speech by senior Emma Gonzalez that included 6 minutes and 20 seconds of silence, the length of February's shooting. Jill Craig, VOA News, Washington.
Washington is watching President Donald Trump's makeover of his national security team to include more outspoken hardliners when it comes to America's posture on the world stage. Here's Michael Bowman reports days after maintaining a CIA director, Mike Pompeo, to become his new Secretary of State, Trump tapped John Bolton, a former Bush administration diplomat known for unflinchingly bellicose rhetoric, to serve as his national security advisor.
I'll now return to private life.
On the heels of Rex Tillerson's departure as Secretary of State, President Trump announced John Bolton will replace General H.R. McMaster as National Security Advisor, effective next month.
The surest way to avoid conflict is to have a strong military capability. As the ancient Romans used to say, si vis pacem, para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war.
After a decade as a television commentator, Bolton returns to government service as Trump's right-hand man on national security, at a time when preparations reportedly are underway for an expected U.S.-North Korea nuclear summit.
Question: how do you know that the North Korean regime is lying? Answer: their lips are moving.
I think the rhetoric out of John Bolton has been a little bit extreme for my taste.
Stephen Hadley held the post Bolton is slated to assume during the George W. Bush administration. Hadley says President Trump himself has demonstrated that tough talk can be productive.
But we have to make this point, give this to the administration, that while they were criticized for too much rattling of the sword with respect to North Korea, it did get China's attention. China did back strong sanctions to North Korea, and it got the attention of the North Korean leadership, who now says they're willing to talk to President Trump. They're willing to talk about denuclearization.
Some note that Bolton's views line up with President Trump's pronouncements on several key adversaries.
I am concerned if I believe Mr. Bolton's rhetoric, where he's talked about preemptive strike or even preemptive war in North Korea. He's obviously very strongly opposed to the nuclear deal in Iran.
Next month, the Senate will consider the nomination of Mike Pompeo to be Secretary of State. Like Bolton, Pompeo has been a sharp critic of the international nuclear accord with Iran. As a presidential candidate, Trump pledged to pull America out of the pact. Michael Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. You're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Macorino. Coming up, come along on a gorilla trek in Rwanda's Virunga National Park. Stay with us. Now, there are about 880 mountain gorillas left in the world. About two-thirds of those gorillas are found in Virunga National Park in Rwanda. The gorillas are considered Rwanda's national treasure. VOA's Edward Rema visited the park and takes us through the gorilla trek experience.
The Parc National de Volca, as it's commonly known, lies along the Virunga Mountains with 8 ancient volcanoes which are shared by Rwanda, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Before the trek, visitors assemble at the park entrance at 7 in the morning for instructions on their trek. The mood here is quite festive, as Rwandan traditional dancers entertain visitors. The number of visitors allowed to see the gorillas is strictly controlled and limited to 80 people a day, divided in groups of 8. It is at this ground that visitors are grouped by tour guides and also receive pre-trek briefing.
With this family, you will see all the categories of the gorillas. You see silverbacks, there are 2 silverbacks. You will see juveniles, you will see adolescents, and you see even babies. All the categories of the gorillas you will find in this group.
After the briefing, myself and 7 other visitors were assigned a group named Pablo. The briefing is followed by a drive to the start of the trek at the slopes of Mount Karisimbi, one of the tallest mountains in Rwanda. Before beginning this rigorous trek, we pick up porters who help us carry our backpacks and cameras, as well as helping you with your footing along your hike at a minimal fee. We were told many of these porters were former poachers. Most of the gorillas live within an altitude of 2,500 and 4,000 meters, and the trek can last anywhere from 1 hour to 8 hours, depending on the family allocated to your group and their location. If there is one thing that is put on test during the trek, it is your fitness. Here, you're climbing a terrain you're not familiar with, bushwalking through the mist-covered bamboo rainforest, stepping over thick vines and branches. After an hour or so of hiking through the thick vegetation, we finally meet up with a family of gorillas, a rare opportunity of sharing a moment with them in their natural habitat. Like humans, gorillas live in families, and the dominant male silverback takes over as the head of the family.
Normally, the family formed according to different circumstances. Sometimes it's formed when the dominant one died. There is no family with only females. If the dominant one died, the silverback, in the group there is only one silverback. Those females, they go to different families where there is a silverback.
Visiting gorillas in Rwanda doesn't come cheap. Last year, the government increased the cost of a gorilla permit from $750 to $1,500. Nonetheless, they say the increment has not stopped tourists from visiting. For veterinarian Eduardo Oldo from Spain, who was on a trek with his newlywed wife, spending their honeymoon trekking gorillas was a lifetime experience.
I've seen so many animals, and this was an amazing experience. I just thought that it could be like just seeing the gorillas in a long distance. I've never thought about having a young one, troublemaker, just trying to bite us. So it was like, what's happening here? Where are they playing with us? So it was like a really amazing and super adrenaline experience.
Ingrid Goldberg from Boston says she has been to other places in Africa, but visiting the gorillas felt so special to her.
There aren't words to describe what just happened. It was absolutely incredible. We saw a 3-month-old baby. We were charged by a silverback Big Daddy. Probably saw 16 different gorillas. From 20 feet to, you have to walk by. It's a couple feet. There are very few words that can describe how I feel right now. It's just absolutely astonishing.
Her husband, Scott Ward, shares the same feeling.
Amazing. My wife and I went on safari last year to Zimbabwe. We went to Kenya, and this is by far the best experience we've had.
Worth your money?
Well worth the money. every penny.
The mountain gorillas of Rwanda were first made famous by Dan Fossey, an American zoologist who documented her studies in her book Gorillas in the Mist, which later was adapted for the big screen in 1988. Edward Rema, VOA News, Washington.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. The blockbuster Marvel film Black Panther breaks another record. We'll be right back.
In
Sierra Leone, a court case brought by an All-People's Congress-linked lawyer complaining of fraud in the March 7th elections may delay the presidential election scheduled for Tuesday. In Ivory Coast, the provisional election results on Sunday show President Alassane Ouattara's ruling coalition will lead the country's new Senate, taking 50 of the 66 seats up for grabs. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the humanitarian crisis may be one of the world's worst, the European Union's top 8 official says, as the government shuns talks to alleviate the suffering of over 13 million Congolese people. In Egypt, polls have opened on Monday for the 3-day presidential election. Incumbent President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is expected to win over his only opposing candidate, Moussa Mustafa Moussa.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Not another victory for the Marvel film Black Panther. The film is now the highest-grossing superhero film ever in the U.S., raking up $631 million in sales. The previous record was set by the Avengers in 2012. Combined with its overseas haul of $606 million, Black Panther has earned nearly $1.25 billion globally, and sales are still going strong. In its first few weeks, Black Panther crushed all competitors, earning $1 billion in only 26 days and held the top spot for 5 straight weekends. And the last film to do that was Avatar, which was #1 for 7 straight weeks back in 2009 and 2010. Well, next up, smart socks that provide continual treatment for those suffering from poor circulation in their legs are being created by an Israeli startup. Although technically a clinical device, the socks can be worn throughout the day, giving off electric pulses that compress the legs and stimulate blood circulation. Elastimed is billed as a comfortable alternative to compression socks for the treatment of venous and lymphatic diseases and chronic wounds. It is also being marketed at athletes to improve their recovery after intense activity, diabetics, and pregnant women whose feet and legs often swell from fluid retention. The socks operate on a rechargeable battery. The wearable device is due to hit the market by mid-2019 with a price range of $150 to $250. Well, and finally, air travel is going to the dogs. Hong Kong company Life Travel started flying pooches and their owners from Hong Kong to Japan last year. It features the trips to customers more affordable and a reliable way to travel compared with commercial airlines. On commercial flights, pets are typically carried in the hold. On private jets, small dogs sit on their owner's lap, while bigger dogs can lie on the floor. Pet holidays start from around $9,000. Longer trips to Zurich, the U.S. and Canada are in the pipeline. Meanwhile, China's Hainan Airlines said in January that it was testing a plan to allow travelers to bring small pets with them on certain domestic routes. And that's what's trending today. And that's our show. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. So, you know what happy is, and medium comes between small and large.
To find a happy medium.
So, is this idiom about feeling kind of happy?
How is it going with your neighbor? Is he still complaining about your playing the trombone at night?
He was, but it's fine now.
How did you guys work